She collapsed alone in the storm. The Mafia boss found her and brought her to his home. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. It was a stormy evening in late November. The rain had been pouring down relentlessly for hours, washing over the streets of the city in a steady stream of water. For Elena, the long day at work had taken its toll. She had been running on barely any sleep and hardly any food, just pushing through the final hours at the rehabilitation center where she worked as a nurse. The exhaustion weighed heavily on her as she made her way to the bus stop, hoping to get home and finally collapse into her bed. But the storm was unforgiving. The wind howled, and the rain turned from a light drizzle into a torrential downpour. Elena wrapped her thin coat tighter around herself, but it was no use. The cold seeped in, and she could feel the dampness settling in her bones. The streets were empty, except for the occasional passing car, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Her heart raced as she tried to hurry, the wet pavement making every step slippery and dangerous. She had to get out of the rain, but there was no shelter in sight. It wasn't long before she stumbled, the wet ground giving way beneath her. She tried to regain her balance, but the weight of her tired body couldn't keep her upright. Her vision blurred as her knees hit the pavement, and she collapsed right there, unable to move. The cold and the exhaustion took over, and for a moment, she wondered if she would just stay there forever, lost in the storm. But fate had other plans. Out of nowhere, a black SUV came to a screeching halt just inches from where she lay. The door swung open, and a man stepped out, tall and imposing, his eyes sharp and focused. He didn't hesitate for a second. He rushed to her side, lifting her effortlessly into his arms. Elena barely registered what was happening, her body too weak to fight. She tried to speak, but her voice was barely a whisper, drowned out by the noise of the rain and the storm. The man didn't respond, only focused on getting her into the car. The vehicle sped off, leaving the cold and the storm behind, taking her to a place she never expected. Elena woke up in an unfamiliar room, her head throbbing, her body aching. She could hear muffled voices outside the door, but everything else felt distant, like a dream she couldn't quite grasp. As she slowly sat up, she saw him, the man who had saved her. He was standing by the window, looking out into the night, his silhouette framed by the soft glow of the city lights. He turned toward her when he noticed she was awake, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "You're safe now." Elena's heart raced again, not from fear, but from something else. Something unfamiliar. She had been rescued, but by who? And why? There was so much she didn't understand. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry. Who are you?" she managed to ask. He paused for a moment, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "But you need to understand, you're not leaving this place until I say so." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Elena felt a chill run down her spine, but it wasn't fear. It was something else, something she couldn't explain. Something about the way he spoke, the way he looked at her. There was power in his words, in his presence. He wasn't just any man. He was someone dangerous. But in that moment, Elena couldn't find the strength to protest. She just nodded, too exhausted and confused to do anything else. The man stepped forward, his gaze softening just a little. "Rest now. You'll need your strength for what's coming." Elena stared at him, wondering what that meant, but too tired to ask. She didn't know it yet, but this moment, this chance encounter in the storm, was the beginning of something far bigger than she could have ever imagined. As the hours passed in the unfamiliar room, Elena couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped. She wasn't sure where she was or why she was here, but one thing was clear, she wasn't in control. Her mind raced with questions, but her body, still weak from the exhaustion, refused to cooperate. She lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the mansion around her. It was eerily quiet, save for the occasional sound of footsteps in the hallway outside her door. Elena tried to recall how she ended up here. The storm, the car, the man. But her memory was foggy, like a distant dream. She had been lost in the storm, desperate for shelter, when he had appeared out of nowhere, like a shadow in the rain. The strong arms that had lifted her from the cold pavement, the calm voice that had reassured her, and the way he had looked at her, it all felt too surreal to process. And now, here she was, in his home, unsure of what to do next. Elena shifted in the bed, her body protesting every movement. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the luxurious furnishings, the plush carpet, the dark wood furniture, the large windows with heavy curtains. Everything screamed wealth, and yet, there was something unsettling about it all. As much as she tried to ignore it, the nagging feeling of being watched crept up on her. She couldn't shake the image of the man, standing in the doorway when she first woke up. His presence was magnetic, commanding, and yet, there was an underlying kindness in his eyes. She had never seen anyone like him before, someone who exuded both power and control. Elena didn't know what to make of him, but she couldn't deny the strange sense of security she felt in his presence. Just then, the door opened, and the man stepped inside, his footsteps soft but purposeful. He didn't knock. He simply entered, his gaze settling on her with that same intensity as before. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Elena opened her mouth to say something, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she just stared at him, unsure of what to expect. Finally, he spoke, his voice deep and smooth, carrying a hint of something foreign, like an accent she couldn't place. "You're awake," he said simply, his eyes never leaving hers. Elena nodded slowly, still unsure of how to respond. "I didn't mean to bring you here like this," he continued, his voice softer now. "But you were in no condition to be left out there." She wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers, but something about the way he spoke made her hesitate. She had no idea who this man was or what he wanted with her. "What is this place?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "This is my home," he replied without hesitation. "And now it's yours too, at least for as long as you need." Elena swallowed hard. His words were simple, but they carried weight. She didn't know what it meant, but something about his offer made her uneasy. She was far from home, in a strange place, with a man she barely knew. And yet, there was a strange sense of comfort in his presence, a feeling that perhaps, just maybe, she could trust him. "You don't have to stay here if you don't want to," he added, as if reading her thoughts. "But I won't let you go out there again. Not in that condition." Elena couldn't deny the truth in his words. The storm had been relentless, and she had been in no shape to fend for herself. Still, the idea of staying in his home, under his roof, made her uneasy. She wasn't sure if she was ready to trust him, but for the time being, she had no choice. "Thank you," she said quietly, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. He gave her a small nod, his expression unreadable. "Rest," he said, his tone gentle yet firm. "You're safe here. No one will hurt you." Elena didn't know if she believed him, but she had no choice but to try. As the man turned and walked toward the door, Elena watched him leave, her mind racing with questions. Who was he? Why had he helped her? And most importantly, what did he want from her? She didn't know the answers, but one thing was certain. Her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. As the days passed, Elena found herself adjusting to the strange, new life she had been thrust into. Each morning, she woke up in the large, opulent bedroom, the soft light filtering through the thick curtains, reminding her how different this place was from the small apartment she had left behind. The storm seemed to be the beginning of something far greater than just an unexpected rescue. Every night, she tried to recall the face of the man who had found her, but each time, she only came up with the same image, his sharp features, those penetrating eyes, and the commanding way he moved through the room. There was something almost magnetic about him, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. At first, she had tried to keep her distance, unsure of why he had taken her in and what his intentions were. But as time passed, that distance began to fade. She had been given no choice but to stay here, with him, under his protection. It wasn't just his home she had come to stay in. It was his world. And whether she liked it or not, she was now a part of it. The mansion was massive, with grand hallways and rooms decorated in rich, dark colors, filled with antique furniture and priceless artwork. She hadn't been allowed to leave the property, and though she had initially resisted, part of her had started to grow accustomed to the quiet luxury. She had a staff at her disposal, meals prepared for her, and a comfortable bed that she had never imagined herself sleeping in. But something about all of it felt wrong. She wasn't sure if it was the way the man, whom she now learned was called Luca, looked at her, or the way his presence seemed to fill every room. He was always calm, always composed, never showing the slightest hint of emotion, yet his eyes always seemed to be searching, probing, as if he were trying to understand her every thought. That gaze unsettled her, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she found herself avoiding his eyes. One evening, a week after the storm, he appeared at the door of the room she had been staying in. He knocked once before entering without waiting for a response, his figure filling the doorway. Elena's heart skipped a beat as she quickly stood from the chair she had been sitting in, feeling both nervous and apprehensive. "I see you're finally up," Luca said, his voice deep and even, with that unmistakable air of authority that seemed to surround him. "I thought we should talk." Elena didn't respond immediately. She wasn't sure what to say. Her time in the mansion had been quiet, almost too quiet, and she had spent the days and a days trying to make sense of everything that had happened. She had been rescued, brought here, and now she was here, stuck in this strange, luxurious life. "What do you want from me?" she finally asked, her voice softer than she intended. "I don't want anything," Luca replied, his eyes narrowing as if weighing her words carefully. "I'm not here to force you into anything. I just want you to be safe." Elena crossed her arms over her chest, unsure if she believed him. "Safe?" she repeated, almost bitterly. "What do you mean by that? How am I supposed to feel safe when I don't even know who you really are?" Luca's expression didn't change. He simply stared at her, as if considering the best way to answer. "You're not like the people outside this house, Elena," he said, his voice quieter now, almost gentle. "You've seen things you shouldn't have seen. I can't let you go back to your old life. Not when you're now a part of mine." The weight of his words hung in the air between them. Elena didn't know what to make of them. He was offering her safety, but there was something about the way he said it that felt more like a warning. Something in his voice told her that her life, her freedom, wasn't entirely in her hands anymore. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It means you stay here, with me, for as long as you need to." He didn't move as he spoke, but his eyes never left hers. Elena swallowed, trying to process what he was saying. She was trapped, in a way. She had nowhere to go, and even if she did, the storm outside wasn't the only thing keeping her from leaving. There was something about him that had a hold on her, something she couldn't escape. She didn't know what it was, but she knew she couldn't outrun it. "I don't need you to protect me," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I can take care of myself." Luca's eyes softened just slightly, though his face remained impassive. "No, you can't," he replied, his tone firm yet oddly reassuring. "Not from what's out there, and not from what's in here." He gestured to the mansion around them. Elena looked at him, feeling the weight of his words settle over her. She had no choice but to stay, no choice but to trust him, even if she didn't understand why he was doing this. Luca stepped closer, his presence overwhelming as he towered over her. "You're safe here, Elena. I'll make sure of that. But you have to understand, things won't be the same anymore. Not for you, and not for me." The following days passed in a haze for Elena. She woke each morning in the lavish bedroom she had been assigned, the soft light filtering through the curtains casting a warm glow on the expensive furnishings. She hadn't expected to feel so at ease here, not in a mansion that could rival any luxury hotel she had ever heard of. But something about the room, the silence, and the quiet luxury around her made her feel protected. Yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still a prisoner. Luca's offer of safety had come with unspoken boundaries, and she was beginning to realize that every moment she spent here, under his roof, came at a cost. He didn't say much about his life, about what he did, but his presence alone spoke volumes. The power he carried was palpable in the way he moved, the way people obeyed him without question. It wasn't just the security guards or the staff. Even the way the world outside seemed to bend around him. It was all part of the silent control he had over everything. On the third evening, after several days of feeling like she was simply existing in his world, Luca asked her to join him for dinner. She had been avoiding him since their last conversation, unsure of how to approach him or even what to say. But now, he was extending a gesture of normalcy, an invitation to share a meal, a moment where she wasn't just his guest, but someone he was taking the time to know. Elena had been avoiding the idea of dinner, unsure of the significance of such a simple invitation. She wasn't sure if he was trying to be kind or if there was something deeper to his intentions. But tonight, she couldn't ignore it. She couldn't keep running from whatever this was. She walked down the grand staircase, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous hall. When she reached the dining room, Luca was already seated at the head of the long, polished table, a glass of red wine in front of him. The atmosphere was still, the only sound the soft music playing in the background. She hesitated at the door for a moment before stepping in, and Luca's eyes immediately found hers. He smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was calculated, like everything about him was. "Come, sit," he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. "I had the chef prepare something special." She sat down, her stomach tightening. The dinner was lavish, a spread of dishes she couldn't even name, each one more luxurious than the last. The food was exquisite, but she couldn't bring herself to enjoy it. How could she, when every bite felt like an act of submission? "You don't like the food?" Luca's voice broke through her thoughts. She looked up, startled by the sudden attention. "It's fine," she replied quickly, not wanting to offend him. I'm not really hungry." His gaze softened slightly, but only for a moment. "You need to eat. You've barely had anything since you arrived." Elena nodded, but it didn't stop the feeling that gnawed at her insides. She didn't belong here. She didn't know what this place was or why he was being so kind. But she was starting to realize that the kindness was only a small part of something much bigger, something that she wasn't sure she could trust. As they ate, they made small talk, but the conversation felt awkward. Every question he asked seemed loaded, as if he were probing, trying to find out more about her. She gave vague answers, avoiding the deeper topics. But she couldn't keep up the charade forever. At some point, she would have to confront the truth of why she was here, why Luca had brought her to his home, and what kind of man he truly was. The meal ended, and Luca excused himself without much ceremony, leaving her sitting alone in the silence of the grand dining room. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something she wasn't prepared for. Later that night, as she lay in bed, she heard footsteps outside her door. It wasn't unusual for the house to be quiet, but tonight, the sound seemed more deliberate, more purposeful. She held her breath, waiting for the door to open, for Luca to come in again. But it didn't. The footsteps faded, and she was left with nothing but her own thoughts. Elena stared at the ceiling, trying to process everything that had happened. She had never felt so conflicted. She didn't know if she should trust Luca or fear him. But there was one thing she was sure of. Her life had already changed forever, and she wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. The days that followed were nothing like the life Elena had known. The mansion had become her new world, and she could feel herself slowly being pulled into it, despite her best efforts to maintain her distance. Luca had been nothing but kind, though there was a coldness to him that she couldn't ignore. It was in the way he moved, the way his eyes would linger on her a little too long, like he was studying her. She was no fool. She knew that he was trying to figure her out. But it was more than that. He was trying to get under her skin, trying to make her feel like she owed him something, like she belonged to him. Every night, after dinner, he would disappear into his study, leaving her alone to reflect on everything that had happened. The house, the luxury, the power he wielded, it all felt like a dream. But as much as she told herself that she should be grateful for his kindness, something about this world made her uneasy. One evening, as Elena sat in the expansive living room, trying to occupy herself with a book, a sharp knock at the door startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone, and the sudden interruption made her heart race. She hesitated before standing up, walking cautiously toward the door. When she opened it, she was met by a man in a dark suit, his expression unreadable. "Miss Elena," he said with a slight bow, his voice formal. "Luca requests your presence in the study." The mention of Luca's name sent a shiver down her spine. She didn't need to be told twice. She nodded, closing the door behind her and following the man. Through the grand hall. As they walked, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something she wasn't prepared for. When they reached the study, the man knocked once before opening the door. Luca was seated behind a large oak desk, his posture straight, as usual. He looked up when she entered, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. "Elena," he said in that deep, calm voice of his. "Come in." We need to talk. She stepped forward, her heart beating faster with every step. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew that whatever it was serious. I need you to understand something, Luca continued, his voice steady but laced with an intensity that made Elena uneasy. You're here because I want you here. I've offered you my protection, my home, and in return, I need your trust. Elena frowned, confused. Trust? She repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Why should I trust you? I don't even know you. Luca's eyes darkened, and he leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. I'm not asking for your trust just yet, he said. But I need you to understand that you're not leaving this house. Not unless I say so. The weight of his words hit her like a ton of bricks. She had always known that there was something more to his offer than just kindness. But hearing him say it out loud, hearing him claim that she was trapped here, made her feel small, powerless. Why? She managed to ask, her voice shaky. Why am I here? What do you want from me? Luca's expression softened for just a moment, but it was brief. You've seen too much, Elena, he said quietly. You overheard something you shouldn't have. You're now part of a world that you can't walk away from. Not without consequences. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She had heard them talking. Those men, those dangerous men, the ones Luca had been involved with. She had overheard their conversation, their plans, their deals. And now, it seemed, she was paying the price. I didn't mean to, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't know what they were talking about. Luca nodded slowly, as if considering her words. I know, he said softly, but that doesn't change anything. You've seen too much. And now, you're part of my world. Elena swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in her throat. She didn't know what he meant by that. What did he want from her? What kind of world had she been dragged into? I don't belong here, she said, almost to herself. I don't want to be part of this. Luca's gaze softened again, and for a brief moment, Elena saw something in his eyes that resembled sympathy. You don't have a choice, Elena, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. This is your life now. The words hung in the air, suffocating her. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to fight back, how to escape. She was trapped, and there was nothing she could do about it. As Luca stood up, walking around the desk to stand in front of her, Elena felt a sense of inevitability settle in her chest. He wasn't going to let her go. Not now, not ever. I'll keep you safe, he said, his voice steady. But in return, you'll have to trust me. Trust that I know what's best for you. Trust that I'm doing this to protect you. Elena didn't respond. She couldn't. Her mind was spinning, trying to process everything that had just happened. But one thing was certain. Her life would never be the same again, and there was no escaping it. The days stretched on in a strange, tension-filled rhythm as Elena settled into her new life under Luca's roof. The mansion, which had initially seemed like a dream come true, now felt like a gilded cage. Each day bled into the next, a haze of opulence and quiet luxury. Despite the comforts, Elena couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in her stomach that told her this place, these people, and most importantly, Luca himself, weren't as safe as they appeared. He had made it clear that she wasn't leaving, not until he said so. And every night, she felt like the walls were closing in just a little bit more. For the first time in her life, Elena was truly powerless. She had tried, at first, to get a grip on the situation, to try and regain some control over her circumstances. But Luca's presence, his quiet authority, his command over everything and everyone in his world, was overwhelming. Every time she tried to step outside, she was stopped by guards. Or Luca himself, his eyes following her with a mix of protection and something else she couldn't quite define. One afternoon, while walking through one of the mansion's many hallways, Elena overheard a conversation between two of Luca's men. They were speaking in hushed voices, but she could catch a few words here and there. She's not ready, one of them said. She's too fragile. Doesn't matter, the other responded. She'll have to adapt. Elena's heart sank as she realized they were talking about her. She wasn't ready? What did that mean? What was she supposed to adapt to? She tried to ignore the conversation and continue walking, but the words haunted her. As the days wore on, she began to understand that the life Luca had pulled her into was far more dangerous and complicated than she had ever imagined. He wasn't just a wealthy businessman. His world, the one she now found herself a part of, was one built on power, secrets, and violence. Still, there were moments, fleeting moments, when Luca would let his guard down. He would smile at her, though it was rare, and he would ask her about her day, as though he genuinely wanted to know. And in those moments, Elena would see a glimpse of something different in him, something human. But those moments were always followed by silence, or worse, by cold indifference, as if he were trying to push her away emotionally. One evening, after dinner, Luca invited her to join him in his study. Elena hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should go, but she found herself walking to the study anyway, curiosity getting the better of her. When she entered, Luca was sitting behind his desk, papers spread out in front of him. He looked up when she entered and motioned for her to sit. "Elena," he said, his voice calm but serious. "I need you to understand something." Elena sat down, her heart thumping in her chest. This didn't feel like a casual conversation. His tone was too serious, too commanding. "What do you need me to understand?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You're part of this now," Luca replied, his eyes locking onto hers with that familiar intensity. "There's no going back. This world, my world, is dangerous. It's not a place for someone like you." Elena opened her mouth to protest, but Luca raised a hand, stopping her. "I didn't bring you here to harm you," he continued. "I brought you here because I need you to stay safe. You've seen too much, Elena, and there are people out there who would do anything to hurt you." Elena swallowed, feeling the weight of his words. She had known, in the back of her mind, that there was more to his protection than he had let on. But hearing him say it, so plainly, made her realize just how far into the world of danger she had stepped. "What do you want from me?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling slightly. Luca leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I want you to stay here," he said. "I want you to be safe. But I need you to trust me." Elena didn't know what to say. She had never been good at trusting people, least of all someone like Luca. But something about his words, his calm demeanor, made her pause. Maybe she didn't have a choice. "Trust you," she repeated. "Why should I trust you? You brought me here, locked me in this house, and now you're telling me it's for my own good." Luca's eyes softened slightly, but his expression remained serious. "I'm not asking you to trust me right now. I'm asking you to survive." Elena didn't know what to say to that. She didn't know how to respond. So, she just sat there, in silence, staring at Luca. He was right about one thing. She was trapped. But what she didn't understand was why he cared. Why had he chosen her? Why had he rescued her from the storm, only to bring her into his world? The questions swirled in her mind, but she couldn't bring herself to ask them. Not yet. As Luca stood up, he walked around the desk, his presence looming over her. "I will keep you safe, Elena," he said, his voice low and firm. "But you need to understand that in this world, nothing comes without a price." Elena's stomach churned as he spoke those words. She had been brought into his world, and now she had to play by his rules. There was no going back, and that terrified her. The days following Luca's warning passed with a quiet tension that Elena couldn't escape. His words, that she was a part of his world now, kept replaying in her mind. She wasn't sure what it meant yet, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life had changed forever. The mansion had become her prison and her sanctuary all at once. Though she was provided for in every way, with meals prepared for her, a staff that catered to her every need, and a comfortable room, Elena couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The mansion was a fortress. Guards patrolled the perimeter, and she wasn't allowed to leave without Luca's permission. She had tried once, slipping past a guard late one night to go out into the city, but she had barely made it a few blocks before the same guard caught up with her. The look on his face had been enough to make her turn back, not that she had much of a choice. Since that incident, she had stayed inside, though she kept her distance from Luca. She had avoided him after their last conversation in the study, not sure what to make of his words or his intentions. It wasn't that he was cruel or unkind. In fact, he had been nothing but respectful, but there was an edge to him, a darkness that she couldn't ignore. One evening, as she wandered through the halls, trying to distract herself from the isolation she felt, Elena found herself in front of the door to Luca's private study again. She hesitated, unsure whether she should knock or simply walk away. She had spent so much time trying to avoid him, but she knew that avoiding him would only make things more complicated. Taking a deep breath, she knocked softly, and before she could retreat, the door opened. Luca stood in the doorway, dressed in a tailored black suit that only seemed to accentuate his commanding presence. He smiled, though it was more out of politeness than genuine warmth. "Elena," he said, his voice smooth. "Come in." Elena stepped inside, her heart pounding. The room was dimly lit, with heavy curtains drawn to block out the evening light. Bookshelves lined the walls, and a large desk sat at the center of the room. It was a place of power, and it felt every bit as intimidating as the man who occupied it. "I didn't expect you tonight," Luca continued, closing the door behind her. He gestured toward the chair across from his desk. "Please, have a seat." Elena hesitated, but she sat down. The silence between them was thick, charged with an unspoken tension. "I've been meaning to speak with you," Luca said, his tone serious, though his eyes softened ever so slightly. "I know you've been avoiding me." Elena bit her lip, unsure of how to respond. "I'm not avoiding you," she finally said, though her voice betrayed her unease. I don't understand what you want from me." Luca leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving hers. "What I want is simple," he said. "I want you to understand that I'm here to protect you, Elena. I brought you into my world because it's the only way I can ensure your safety. You're part of this now, whether you like it or not." The words hit her harder than she expected. She had heard them before, but hearing them again, so plainly, made it all feel so much more real. "I never asked for this," Elena said, her voice quieter now. "I didn't ask to be here." Luca's eyes darkened, and he stood up, walking around the desk to stand in front of her. "I didn't ask you to be here either," he said, his voice low but steady. "But you are. And now, you need to trust me." Elena swallowed hard, her heart racing. She didn't know how to trust him, not when everything about her situation felt so wrong. "I don't know if I can trust you," she whispered. "How can I? I don't know anything about you, Luca. You're a stranger to me." Luca's expression softened, and he reached out, his hand hovering just above her shoulder before he lowered it. "I'm not asking you to trust me right away," he said gently. "But I need you to understand that I'm not your enemy. And you're not just some prisoner here." Elena looked up at him, meeting his gaze. There was something in his eyes, something that almost made her believe him, but she couldn't quite bring herself to fully trust him. "Not yet. I don't know if I can ever be part of this world," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. "It's not my world, Luca. It's not who I am." He studied her for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost sympathetic. "You don't have to be part of it, Elena. But the truth is, you already are. And whether you accept it or not, your life is now tied to mine." The words stung more than she expected. She felt the weight of them, heavy and suffocating. She had no choice. She was already caught in his world, whether she liked it or not. "I'm not going anywhere," Luca added, his tone final. "And neither are you." The finality in his voice made Elena's chest tighten. She didn't know what to say anymore. She didn't know if there was anything left to say. All she knew was that she was trapped, and for the first time, she wondered if she could ever truly escape. The tension between them had only grown since their last conversation. Luca's words echoed in Elena's mind. "You're part of this now." She had no choice but to accept it, even if she didn't fully understand it. The mansion, once a place of luxury, had started to feel like a gilded cage. She was safe, yes, but at what cost? Days passed, and the realization sank deeper into her. She couldn't leave. It was as if the very air in the house had woven itself into her, tying her to this world she never asked to be a part of. Luca had given her protection, but it came with strings attached. He had made that clear when he first brought her here. Yet, as time went on, there were moments that made her question his intentions. He was distant, yet there was an undeniable pull in his presence. He seemed to care, but at times, his coldness and commanding demeanor made it hard to trust him completely. It wasn't just that she didn't know who he truly was, but that she was starting to wonder if she would ever have the chance to find out. One afternoon, when she was wandering through the mansion's extensive gardens, Elena caught a glimpse of Luca through a large window. He was talking to someone in a serious tone, his back turned to her. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but the intensity of his expression made her stop in her tracks. There was something in the way he carried himself, something that said he was a man who had dealt with danger, violence, and power, and it made her shiver. She had only seen him in the comfort of the mansion, never in the world outside, but even in the confines of the house. She could sense the darkness that lingered around him. As the days passed, their interactions remained mostly formal. He had his moments of kindness, brief glimpses of warmth, but they were always fleeting. And then, one evening, Luca came to her with a request. It was unexpected, and the way he phrased it made her uneasy. "Elena," he began, his tone more serious than usual, "I need you to come with me. There's something you need to see." Elena hesitated, uncertainty washing over her. "What is it?" she asked, her voice laced with caution. Luca met her gaze, his eyes unwavering. "It's time you understand the full extent of what you're a part of." Elena's stomach twisted at his words. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew she wasn't prepared for whatever he was about to show her. They left the mansion together, Luca leading the way with that same confident stride. The guards opened the gates for them, and as they drove through the quiet streets, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. The car stopped in front of a building she didn't recognize. It was an old warehouse, tucked away in a corner of the city, surrounded by nothing but shadows and silence. The kind of place that whispered of things better left unseen. Luca turned to her, his gaze intense. "Stay close," he instructed, his voice low. Elena followed him into the building, her heart pounding in her chest. As they walked through the dimly lit halls, Elena felt a sense of foreboding grow stronger. The walls were lined with crates, and the air smelled of dust and oil. Luca led her into a large room at the back, where several men stood around a table, discussing something in hushed tones. Their conversation ceased as they entered, and all eyes turned to Luca. The room fell silent, and for a moment, Elena felt like an outsider, like she didn't belong here. Luca addressed the men, his voice cold and commanding. "This is Elena," he said, his gaze briefly meeting hers. "She's part of this now." Elena stood frozen, unsure of what to make of the situation. She had heard the whispers, seen the way people looked at her when she entered this world, but hearing Luca's words made it all feel too real. She was a part of this now. But what did that really mean? The men in the room looked at her with a mix of curiosity and suspicion, as if trying to figure out what role she would play in their world. She could feel their eyes on her, and it made her skin crawl. Luca didn't seem to notice the tension. He was focused on the task at hand, speaking to the men in a way that commanded respect. Elena watched, trying to make sense of it all, but the more she tried to understand, the more confused she became. Luca had pulled her into his world, but she was beginning to realize that there were many layers to this world, many things she wasn't ready to see. As the meeting continued, Elena couldn't help but feel like she was on the edge of something much bigger than herself. She had no choice but to follow Luca, to stay by his side, but deep down, she couldn't ignore the growing fear that something terrible was waiting just around the corner. When the meeting ended, Luca turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You're safe here," he said, though Elena wasn't sure she believed him anymore. "But you need to understand, there's no turning back." The words sent a chill down her spine. She had already seen too much. She was already too far gone. There was no turning back now. The days had blurred together for Elena since that fateful evening when Luca had introduced her to his world. She still didn't understand the full scope of what she had gotten herself into, but one thing was clear, there was no escaping it. The mansion, once a place of refuge, had become both her sanctuary and her prison. Despite the luxurious surroundings, the feeling of being watched, of being controlled, never left her. Luca had been the same, kind at times, distant at others. She couldn't predict him, and that made her uncomfortable. But what unsettled her the most was the growing realization that she wasn't just under his protection. She was under his watch, under his command, and she wasn't sure if she could handle it much longer. One evening, after dinner, Luca invited her into his study again. He seemed to have a way of drawing her in, even when she wanted to keep her distance. He had that power over her. Reluctantly, she agreed to meet him there. The study was just as she remembered, dark, cozy, with shelves upon shelves of books lining the walls. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, and a heavy silence filled the room. Luca stood near the window, his back to her as she walked in. "You wanted to see me?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned around slowly, his piercing eyes locking with hers. "I wanted to talk," he said, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "I know things have been tense between us." Elena couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. Tense. That's one way to put it. Luca's gaze didn't falter, and for the first time, Elena saw a flicker of something, regret, maybe, in his eyes. I'm not trying to make things difficult for you, Elena, he said, his voice softer now. I just need you to understand that this world, it's not a place for someone like you. Elena crossed her arms, feeling a pang of anger. What's that supposed to mean? You brought me here. You dragged me into this world. Now you're telling me it's not for me. Luca stepped forward, his presence overwhelming. It wasn't my choice either, he said quietly. But it's the world we're in now, and I need you to trust me. Elena felt a knot tighten in her chest. Trust you? She repeated, her voice shaky. How am I supposed to trust you when you won't even tell me what's really going on? Luca's expression hardened, but his voice remained steady. You don't need to know everything. What matters is that you're safe here. I'm keeping you safe, and that's all you need to focus on right now. Elena took a step back, feeling the weight of his words. She had no idea what he was involved in, no idea what kind of world she had entered. But she couldn't ignore the fear that gnawed at her every time she thought about the dangers lurking just beyond the walls of the mansion. I don't feel safe, she said, her voice trembling. I feel trapped. I don't know who I can trust or why I'm even here. Luca's eyes softened, but he didn't say anything for a moment. Instead, he walked toward her, slowly, carefully, as if weighing his next words. You're here because I need you to be, he said finally. You're not just some innocent bystander, Elena. You've seen things. You know too much. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She had overheard those conversations, the ones she wasn't supposed to hear. She had seen the way Luca and his men operated, the way they controlled everything around them. But she didn't know how deep it went. She didn't know how far Luca's influence reached. I don't want to be a part of this, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Luca stopped in front of her, his gaze intense. You don't have a choice, he said quietly. You're already part of it. You can't walk away now. Not after everything you've seen. Elena felt tears well up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had been through so much in her life. But this was different. She didn't know if she could survive this world, this life that Luca was forcing on her. I don't want this, she said, her voice breaking. I just want to go home. Luca's expression softened for a moment, but then he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. This is your home now, Elena, he said softly. You may not like it, but this is where you belong. You're safe here, and that's all I care about. Elena shook her head, her heart pounding in her chest. I don't feel safe, she said again. I feel like I'm suffocating. Luca reached out, gently cupping her face in his hand. His touch was warm, almost comforting, but there was something cold about the way he looked at her. I won't let anything happen to you, he said, his voice low. But you need to trust me. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his words press down on her. She had no choice but to stay, no choice but to trust him. But as she opened her eyes and met his gaze, she couldn't shake the feeling that something much darker was unfolding around her, and no matter how much she tried to fight it, she was already in too deep. The days had begun to feel like an endless loop for Elena. Each day in the mansion felt like a repeat of the last, with the same lavish rooms, the same cold, impassive guards, and the same quiet moments where she tried to escape the ever-present weight of Luca's gaze. He was always there, watching, waiting, observing her like a hawk. It was a constant reminder of her reality. She was stuck, caught in a world she didn't belong to, with no way out. Despite her desire to leave, the reality of the situation pressed in on her. Luca had made it clear that there was no escape, and the more time she spent with him, the more she began to understand the extent of the danger that surrounded him. And now, her. The walls of the mansion had started to close in on her, and she felt the creeping sense of claustrophobia that came with being trapped in a life she hadn't chosen. One evening, after yet another uncomfortable dinner, Luca approached her as she wandered through the halls, lost in thought. Elena, he called, his voice low and commanding, as always. Come with me. She turned to face him, startled by the unexpected request. She had been trying to avoid him lately, still unsure of how to navigate the strange, uncertain dynamic between them. But the way he spoke, with that quiet authority, made it impossible to ignore him. What is it? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Luca's gaze softened for a moment, a brief flicker of something human in his eyes. "There's something I need to show you," he said, and without waiting for her reply, he turned and began to walk toward his study. Elena hesitated for only a second before following him. She didn't know what to expect, but part of her couldn't shake the feeling that something important was about to happen. They entered the study, a room she had been in only a few times before. The heavy curtains were drawn, casting the room in soft, muted light. Luca went to his desk and pulled open a drawer, retrieving a thick folder. He placed it on the desk in front of her and slid it toward her. "What's this?" Elena asked, her curiosity piqued despite herself. Luca didn't answer right away. He stood by the window, staring out into the night, his back turned to her. "This is the truth," he said finally, his voice low, almost like he was speaking to himself. "The world I live in. The world I've tried to protect you from." Elena picked up the folder, her hands trembling as she opened it. Inside were photographs, documents, and files. Each one seemed to tell a story of power, danger, and betrayal. As she flipped through the pages, the weight of what she was seeing began to sink in. There were pictures of people she didn't recognize, but their faces were cold and menacing. There were maps and plans, details of operations she couldn't even begin to understand. But the most disturbing thing of all was the realization that Luca was at the center of it all. His name appeared on every page, in every document. He wasn't just a businessman. He was the leader of something much darker, something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. She looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice shaky. Luca turned slowly, meeting her gaze. "This is my world, Elena," he said, his voice colder now. "This is who I am. And you're a part of it now, whether you want to be or not." Elena's breath caught in her throat. She had suspected, but seeing it laid out in front of her, in black and white, was something else entirely. She had been right all along. Luca wasn't just a man of wealth and power. He was a man who controlled everything around him, a man who played a dangerous game. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me?" Luca's eyes softened just a fraction, but there was still that coldness behind them. "I want you to understand, Elena," he said quietly. "This is the life you're now a part of. You can't walk away from it. And you can't walk away from me." Elena's heart skipped a beat at his words. She had been trying to keep her distance, trying to hold on to whatever piece of her old life she could. But now, it felt like that piece was slipping through her fingers. She had seen too much, heard too much. She was already in this world, whether she liked it or not. Luca stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "You're here because I need you to be," he continued. "But I'm not going to force you into anything. I'm giving you the choice, Elena." She looked up at him, her mind racing. "What choice?" "You can leave," he said softly. "But if you do, you'll be walking into a world that will destroy you. If you stay, I will protect you. I'll make sure nothing happens to you. But you have to make the choice, and it has to be your choice." Elena's mind spun. Leave? Stay? Both options seemed impossible. She had already lost so much, and the thought of leaving this place, of walking into whatever danger awaited her, terrified her. But staying meant accepting this world, accepting Luca's control over her life. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know if she could ever trust him completely. But one thing was clear. Her life had already changed, and there was no turning back now. Elena stood frozen in the study, the folder in her hands feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Luca's words echoed in her ears. "This is my world, and you're a part of it now." She had known something was off about the life he led, but seeing the evidence, the cold reality of it, had made it all too real. His world was dangerous, filled with power and darkness that she could never have imagined. Her world had been simple, quiet, and filled with small hopes. But this was a different kind of world. She had crossed a line, and now there was no going back. She looked up at Luca, his gaze steady, unreadable, as if he were waiting for her to come to some sort of understanding. But the only thing she could feel was the heavy weight of the decision hanging over her. She couldn't stay in his world, not with everything she had seen, not with what she now knew. And yet, leaving wasn't as simple as it seemed. Luca's presence had a pull, an undeniable force that made it hard to imagine walking away from him. The protection he offered came at a price, one that was becoming harder to ignore with each passing day. She had seen the power he held, and for all the fear it instilled in her. There was a part of her that couldn't deny the allure of it. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick, heavy with the weight of what had been said. Finally, Luca spoke, his voice breaking the tension. "You're not going anywhere, Elena. Not after everything that's happened." His words weren't a threat, but a statement of fact, and it made her feel like she was caught in a trap with no way out. "I can't live like this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can't be part of this world." Luca's expression softened for a moment, and he walked closer to her, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know you didn't choose this," he said quietly, "but this is the reality now. You can't run from it, and you can't escape it." He was right, she realized. There was no running, no hiding. Not anymore. "You think I wanted this?" she asked, her voice shaking with frustration. "I didn't want any of this. I didn't ask to be here." "I didn't ask for it either," Luca replied, his voice surprisingly gentle. "But sometimes life puts us in situations we can't control." Elena felt a wave of emotion crash over her. She wanted to yell, to run, to do anything to escape the suffocating feeling that had taken over her. But she knew that no matter how much she fought it, she was stuck. Luca stepped even closer, and for a brief moment, Elena thought he might reach out to comfort her. But instead, he just stood there, watching her with that unreadable look in his eyes. "You don't have to understand it all right now," he said softly. "But you need to trust me. I will keep you safe, Elena." She wanted to argue, wanted to fight back, but the words stuck in her throat. She was terrified of what her life had become, but she also couldn't deny that there was a part of her that wanted to believe him. "You keep saying you'll protect me," she said, her voice filled with uncertainty. "But what about everything else? What about what I've seen? What about the people you're involved with?" Luca's eyes darkened slightly at her words, and for the first time, Elena saw a flicker of something darker in them. "I can't protect you from everything, Elena," he said, his voice low and steady. "There are things in this world that you're better off not knowing. And there are people I can't keep you from. But I can promise you this. I will do everything in my power to keep you safe." Elena took a step back, her mind spinning. The weight of his words was almost too much to bear. She was in deeper than she realized, and no matter how much she wanted to deny it, there was no way out. Luca was right. She was a part of this world now. "I'm scared," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I don't know what to do anymore." Luca's gaze softened again, and he took another step toward her, closing the distance between them. "I know you're scared," he said quietly, "but I'm here. I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you. You just have to trust me." Elena didn't know what to say. How could she trust him when everything about his world terrified her? But as she looked into his eyes, she saw a sincerity there that made her hesitate. Maybe it was the only option left. Maybe she had no choice but to trust him. With a heavy heart, Elena nodded, though the fear still gnawed at her insides. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that whatever happened, her life had already changed, and there was no going back. Elena sat in the study, her hands trembling as she gripped the glass of water Luca had handed her. His words from the previous night echoed in her mind. "You're part of this now. You can't leave." No matter how much she wanted to deny it, she knew he was right. There was no going back, no escaping the world she had been pulled into. The more she tried to distance herself, the more she realized that the world around her had become her reality. Her days in the mansion, surrounded by guards and servants, were beginning to feel like a prison. But Luca's presence, his constant vigilance, was what kept her anchored in this life. She had tried to keep her distance, but the way he watched her, the way his eyes seemed to see right through her, made it impossible. Every time their paths crossed, she felt that same mix of fear and attraction that confused her. He wasn't just a man who protected her. He was the man who controlled her. She had seen it in his eyes, felt it in the way he spoke. He was no ordinary man. He was a mafia boss, the kind of person who held power in ways most people could never understand. And she was part of his world now, whether she liked it or not. As the days passed, Luca's presence in her life became more overwhelming. He was always there, watching, ensuring she was safe, but it was clear that his protection came at a cost. She was a part of his world now, and she had no choice but to accept that. One afternoon, Luca asked her to join him for a walk in the garden. It was a rare moment of quiet, a break from the chaos of the mansion. The weather was warm, and the sun bathed the grounds in a golden light. As they walked along the well-manicured path, Luca spoke to her in a way that was different from before. He wasn't the cold, calculating man she had grown accustomed to. There was a softness to his voice, a warmth that she had never heard before. "You're adjusting to all of this better than I thought you would," he said, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "I thought it would take longer for you to come to terms with the life I've given you." Elena glanced at him, unsure of how to respond. She didn't know if she was adjusting or just resigning herself to her fate. "I'm not sure I'm adjusting," she said quietly. "I'm just here." Luca stopped walking and turned to face her. "You're more than just here," he said, his voice firm. "You're important. You've always been important to me." Elena's heart skipped a beat at his words. She had heard him say things like this before, but never with the sincerity that she heard now. He took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. "I know this life is overwhelming," he continued, "but I want you to know that you're safe with me. You're not just some possession. You're someone I care about." The sincerity in his voice made Elena's chest tighten. She didn't know what to make of it. Could she trust him? Could she really believe that he cared about her? Or was this just another part of his control over her? The questions swirled in her mind, but before she could respond, the moment was interrupted by a loud noise from the direction of the mansion. Luca's eyes immediately hardened, and he turned swiftly, his demeanor shifting back to the cold, commanding presence she had grown accustomed to. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice clipped. Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked back toward the mansion, his guards following closely behind. Elena stood frozen for a moment, watching him go. She didn't know what had just happened, but she felt a shift in the air. The warmth she had felt moments before had dissipated, replaced by a tension that had always been present in Luca's world. He was a man of power, and even in his most tender moments, the weight of that power was never far behind. She walked slowly back toward the mansion, her mind racing with thoughts she didn't fully understand. She had been pulled into a world of power, wealth, and danger, and no matter how much she tried to deny it, she knew she was in too deep. The path she had been forced onto was one she could not escape. She had no choice but to walk it, even if it meant losing herself along the way. Later that evening, as she sat alone in her room, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Luca had shown her a side of him she hadn't seen before, a side that was softer, more vulnerable. But as soon as that moment had passed, he had returned to the cold, commanding man he was. She didn't know which version of him was the real one, but she had a feeling it didn't matter. Luca was the man in control, and she was nothing more than a piece in his game. The question remained, how long could she survive in this world before she lost herself completely? The days had grown heavy, suffocating even, as Elena continued to live in the mansion under Luca's watchful eye. No matter how many nights passed, the uncertainty of her situation never wavered. Each moment she spent in the mansion felt like she was being swallowed whole by a world she didn't belong to. Luca had offered her safety, but in doing so, he had trapped her in his life, a life filled with secrets, danger, and power. She couldn't escape the constant tug of his control, and no matter how much she fought against it, she knew she was in too deep. There were times when she wondered if he truly cared for her, or if she was just another piece in his game, another pawn to protect. The tender moments, when he had let his guard down and shown her a side of himself that was soft, vulnerable even, were few and far between. Most of the time, Luca was cold and calculating, as if he were constantly measuring every word, every action, to keep her in line. But one thing remained constant. He had kept her safe, even if it was in his own way, with his own rules. One evening, as Elena sat alone in her room, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. It was a feeling she had been trying to ignore, but it had been building for days. Luca had been acting distant, more detached than usual, and she couldn't help but wonder if the quiet tension that had settled over the mansion was a warning of something worse to come. She had seen the way Luca's eyes would darken when he spoke about his business, the way he controlled everything around him. But she had never truly seen the extent of his power, the kind of power that could make or break lives in the blink of an eye. It was then that she heard the knock on her door. Her heart skipped a beat as she stood up, unsure of who it could be. The guards never knocked, and Luca had made it clear that she didn't need to worry about anyone else. When she opened the door, it was Luca standing there, his expression unreadable. "Come with me," he said simply, his voice low, almost too calm. Elena hesitated for a moment, her heart racing. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. Luca's gaze softened, but only for a moment. "It's time you understand everything," he said, his tone serious. He stepped aside to let her pass, and without another word, she followed him down the long, dimly lit hallway. Her mind was racing, her instincts telling her that whatever was coming next, she wasn't ready for it. They stopped in front of a door she had never seen before, one that seemed hidden away from the rest of the mansion. Luca opened it without a word, and Elena followed him into the room. It was a small, dimly lit office, and sitting behind the desk was a man Elena had never met before. He looked up as they entered, his cold, calculating eyes appraising her with a sharpness that made her uneasy. "Elena, this is Franco," Luca said, his voice tight with something Elena couldn't quite place. "He's part of the operation. You need to understand that there are things happening, things you need to be aware of." Franco stood up slowly, his gaze never leaving Elena as he extended his hand to her. She didn't take it. She didn't trust him. "What do you mean?" Elena asked, her voice shaky but determined. "What's going on?" Luca's eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, she saw something darker in them, something that made her blood run cold. "It's time," Luca said, his voice steady but firm. "You've seen enough to know the truth. You're not just my responsibility anymore, Elena. You're involved in this now, whether you want to be or not." Elena's breath caught in her throat as she processed his words. "Involved in what?" she whispered, her body frozen in place. Luca stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "You're a part of my world, Elena," he said, his voice low, almost intimate. "And there's no going back. The people we deal with, they don't take kindly to weakness. If you want to survive this, you have to accept who you are in this world. Who you are to me." Elena felt a wave of panic wash over her. She had been pulled into something far deeper than she had ever imagined. The weight of Luca's words hit her like a ton of bricks. She couldn't escape this. There was no getting out. Luca had made sure of that. She had always thought that she was safe, that she could stay hidden in the mansion, away from the dangers outside. But now, she realized that the danger was much closer than she had thought. It was in the very walls of the mansion. It was in the people she interacted with every day. It was in Luca, and it wasn't going away. Luca watched her closely, his gaze never wavering. "You're stronger than you think," he said, his voice a little softer now. "But you have to trust me. You have to accept what's happening. If you don't, you won't make it." Elena swallowed hard, her mind spinning. She had no idea how to survive this, no idea what the future held. But one thing was certain, there was no turning back. Her life had been changed forever, and now, she had to live with the consequences. And whether she liked it or not, she was tied to Luca's world, for better or worse. In this dark romance, Elena finds herself trapped in a world that she never asked to be a part of. After a near-fatal encounter in a storm, she is taken into the protective arms of Luca, a Mafia boss with a dangerous past. As Elena adjusts to her new life, she discovers that Luca's world is far darker than she could ever have imagined. This dark romance delves deep into the complexities of power, control, and the haunting desire for survival. Elena must navigate the uncertainty of her feelings toward Luca while being ensnared in the web of his dangerous life. As she learns more about the sinister forces surrounding Luca, she faces the harsh reality of what it means to be a part of his world. With every decision, Elena grows more entangled in the web of this dark romance. As Luca's grip tightens, Elena realizes that escape is no longer an option, and she must decide whether to embrace the dark world that Luca has created for her or risk losing herself forever. With each passing day, the tension in this dark romance intensifies, and Elena is forced to confront her deepest fears and desires. Will she be able to navigate the darkness, or will it consume her completely? This gripping dark romance is filled with twists, secrets, and an unrelenting journey into the unknown.